All right, the time has come. I now have a 16-inch MacBook Pro with M1 Max and a 14-inch MacBook Pro with M1 Max. Now, beyond the size difference of these two laptops, there's actually a couple of other differences inside. So let's do a quick comparison. Hey, I'm Jerry. And yes, these are the brand new MacBook Pros from Apple. And after the first day and a half, they are pretty great. Now, it's going to take some time to get some real long-term impressions of these guys and find the issues with them. But in the first day and a half, they've been pretty good and a little bit surprising. It's almost like Apple is doing a little apology tour with the new 16 and 14-inch MacBook Pros. They're like, hey, I'm sorry for that, butterfly keyboard, or the butterfly keyboard 2, or the butterfly keyboard 3, or the focus on thin and light designs over productivity and performance. Or what about continuing to put out potato cameras in a pandemic when everybody's working from home? Well, the good news is, I think most of that has been resolved, so let's take a look at these two laptops and see how they compare. Now let's just start with the specs of these two laptops. Starting with the left side, which is the 16-inch MacBook Pro. This is the high base model of the 16-inch MacBook Pro, which has a 10-core CPU, a 32-core GPU, 32 gigabytes of RAM, and 1 terabyte of SSD storage. On the right side, we have the 14-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 Max chip with 10-core CPU, 30-core, 32-core GPU, 64 gigabytes of RAM in this guy, and 2 terabytes of SSD storage. The 16-inch model that I have here is going to run $3,499, and this custom upgraded 14-inch model is going to run $4,099. And yes, that is a crap ton of money, and it's really going to be up to you individually to decide if these computers are worth that to you. Depending on your workload and your needs, these laptops may be able to help you do your job better. I can't tell you that. I can just show you how I'm using mine, and hopefully that can help you decide. Both the 14 and the 16-inch model have the same new updated design, which is a flat top, flat sides, and a taper on the bottom to go underneath the laptop. These models are both thicker than the previous MacBook Pros that we've had for the last few years. And that's a good thing because Apple wasn't so worried about a thin and light design. Instead, they chose a thicker design to account for higher performance, better heat dissipation, and a big battery inside these beasts. And the 16-inch MacBook Pro is just slightly thicker than the 14-inch MacBook Pro. On the bottom, we have these new flat feet instead of those nubs or whatever was on the previous MacBook Pros. You can see the vents on both sides, and there's actually vents up here by the display as well. Now, one of the first things that you're going to notice when you pick up one of these brand new MacBooks is the weight. Like, they are hefty, they feel solid. The 16-inch is extremely heavy when you first pull it out of the box. It's just kind of a shocker going from something like the 13-inch MacBook Pro or even the previous 16-inch MacBook Pro, which weighed 4.3 pounds. This new 16-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 Max chip weighs 4.8 pounds. So it's half a pound heavier than the previous 16-inch MacBook. And the 14-inch MacBook Pro weighs 3.5 pounds, so about half a pound heavier on this guy as well. And if you're considering buying the 16-inch MacBook Pro over the 14 because you want that larger display, then I definitely recommend you check one out before you do that, because it's different seeing in person and actually holding it and feeling the heft to this thing versus looking at a spec page or watching a video online. The 16-inch can be a little cumbersome to hold or to carry for long distances if that's something you're going to be doing a lot, like maybe running around a campus. And it definitely takes up more space on a desk unless you get some kind of vertical mount. So those are definitely things that you should consider when you're choosing between the 14-inch and the 16-inch MacBook Pro. How portable are you really going to be with it? And I'll do a comparison against the previous generation MacBook Pro if that's something you're interested in. So let me know below or hit the thumbs up if that's something you want to see. As far as ports go, on the left side, we have the brand new MagSafe 3 connection. We have 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports and a headphone jack. On the right side, we have an SD card slot, a Thunderbolt 4 slot, and a HDMI 2.0 port. And luckily, the configurations are the same on both laptops, so you're not going to miss some ports on the 14-inch if that's the size that you prefer. Now, as we open these guys up, which you can do one-handed, it might slide just a little bit depending on the table, but you can do it with one hand, which is nice. You're going to find the 16.2-inch Liquid Retina XDR display and the 14.2-inch Liquid Retina XDR display over here. And the displays, just after a day and a half, look amazing. And similar to the iPad Pro with the Liquid Retina XDR and the Pro Display XDR for, the $5,000 display for the Mac Pro, these guys get impressively bright. Both of these laptops get up to 1,000 nits of peak brightness in regular use and up to 1,600 nits of brightness with HDR content, which, feels like it can sear your eyeballs, but in a good way. And behind these displays are thousands and thousands of little mini LEDs that will light up as needed to just light up the portion of the display that you need to have lit up. So if there's a dark portion, those LEDs are off. If there's a light portion, those LEDs are on. Since my videos aren't in HDR, it's pretty much impossible for me to show you what this looks like on these giant displays, but it's just amazing. Looking at this Earth HDR video, it's just like you're looking through a piece of glass, like you're looking through eyeglasses. Like there's nothing between you and what you're seeing on the display. The shadows have detail. The highlights aren't blowing out. And the colors are just super vivid. It's like you're actually there. Like I think I'm gonna cut my finger if I push it in there. Now I've never used the Pro Display XDR or a similar panel with full HDR capability, but I have used, of course, the iPads Pro with the Liquid Retina XDR, and those look amazing. But even on bigger screens, whether it's 14 or 16 inch, it is, I don't even know how to say it. It really is kind of like a life-changing type thing. I just want all of my content to look like real life, just like it does right here. Especially when you add in ProMotion for that variable refresh display that makes everything that you do on the screen smooth, yet it can also ramp down to save battery life. Now, because these displays use mini LEDs and light up different portions of the screen versus OLED, which can turn off each individual pixel, there is the possibility of something called blooming, which is where you have something that's bright on a black background and causes a bit of a halo effect around the sides. Now, in my limited testing with these devices, it's not something that I see in regular use. If you really look for it and you go to the extremes, you can see it, but it's not as clear on these MacBooks as it was even on the iPads Pro with the Liquid Retina XDR displays. To me, it's not an issue and not something worth spending any more time on. But of course, something that we do have to talk about is that notch. Yes, that notch that's up top that houses the camera, but for some reason, no Face ID and no ultra-wide camera for center stage. There's really two ways to look at the notch. Either the notch gives you more screen space or the notch removes screen space. And I'm not sure exactly where I fall just yet, but I have noticed that it is nice that the windows for your application go all the way up to the notch or close to the notch, and then you have your menu bar above that. So in a way, it feels like you do have more screen space because if it weren't for the notch, you'd have a bigger bezel, and that means that the menu would be below where this notch is now, so you would have less vertical screen real estate. But then there's issues with having a notch, like your mouse cursor getting stuck behind there, or menu bar items that go all the way across, or when you have a lot of menu bar items or a lot of menus for an application, those get messed up or sometimes hidden behind the notch, according to some videos. So I do think it's gonna take some time for Apple and developers to figure out how to fully work around the notch. So there's gonna be a little bugginess for now until that is resolved. And one other thing about the notch is that the notch on both the 14 and the 16 inch are the same size. So you actually have less menu bar space on the 14 inch because of that notch versus the 16 inch. So you can get more menu bar items or more menus on the 16 inch over the 14. Both of these laptops get the brand new Magic Keyboard, which is all black and sitting on a black double anodized keyboard well. The keys up top are now full-size function keys and replace the touch bar. Now, I myself was pretty ambivalent about the touch bar, and I usually had it configured just to display the standard function keys anyway, but I do prefer the physical tactile function keys, especially things for like volume control and screen brightness, and I really do like the new Do Not Disturb switch that's been on laptops since the M1s. And I guess Apple said something about how they feel like mechanical keys. It feels like a Magic Keyboard, which is great because I like the Magic Keyboard. Now, one thing I did notice, and I'm not sure if it's some kind of placebo effect, is the Touch ID feels faster. So when I register a fingerprint, it feels like it just acknowledges my fingerprint faster than previous Touch ID sensors. And I can quickly fly through and add a fingerprint in no time. It just feels faster to me for some reason. So I'm curious if anybody else is sensing that. Inside both of these MacBooks is a brand new speaker system, including 2 new tweeters and 2 sets of force-canceling woofers on each MacBook. And the first impression of these speakers is that they're amazing for laptop speakers, like crazy good. The 16-inch gets so loud that I worry that I'm gonna disturb people in the house on the other side. So to test this, I'm going to load the same track on both computers and play them, so you let me know in the comments which one you think sounds better. So I hope you can hear the difference between these two laptops on that audio test, but I also used a decimeter app to actually check the decibels coming out of each laptop. And this test kind of confirmed my suspicions. The 16-inch MacBook Pro hovered around 80 decibels versus the 78, 79 decibels on the 14-inch. And this is a camera and microphone test on the brand new 16-inch MacBook Pro. This is a camera and video test on the 14-inch MacBook Pro. Both of these computers got the brand new updated sensor along with the brand new image signal processing built into the new processors on these laptops. I really just wanted to know, is there any difference in quality between these two cameras? And I'm sure there isn't, but like the speakers, there might be some kind of slight difference. And of course, for this test, I am using the built-in studio microphones on these laptops. So how's it sound? Now I want to jump into performance really quick. I just posted a M1X benchmarks video with the 16-inch MacBook Pro earlier today. So if you're interested, check that out. But what's interesting about the 16-inch MacBook Pro is that it actually has a high power mode. I ran all of my tests in high power mode, and then I ran some after the tests without high power mode on, and I saw no difference. Now there is a difference between these two MacBook Pros. Both of them have the M1 Max chips. However, the 16-inch has 32 gigabytes RAM and the 14-inch has 64 gigabytes of RAM, as well as a 2 terabyte SSD. So I want to run just a couple of quick benchmarks on the 14-inch to compare against the results I had on the 16-inch. So first up is the Blackmagic disk speed test. On the 16-inch MacBook Pro, I was getting 5.8 gigabytes per second write and 5.2 gigabytes per second read. It looks like this 2 terabyte drive on the 14-inch MacBook Pro is a bit faster. We are getting up to 6.4, almost 6.5 gigabytes per second on write and 5.5 gigabytes per second on read. And these numbers are just insane for laptop speed. So if you need something with high I/O, these guys can probably do it. Next up is the obligatory Geekbench 5 test. And in this test, the numbers were pretty much even with the 16-inch MacBook Pro, if not slightly less, with 1754 for single core versus the 1783 single core on the 16-inch, and then 12,355 on multi-core versus 12,629 multi-core on the 16-inch, which looks like the extra 32 gigabytes in the 14-inch didn't help at all. So let's check the Geekbench Metal score. So surprising, on the Geekbench Metal score, we actually did get a higher score with the 14-inch M1 Max with 64 gigabytes of RAM, a score of 68,209 versus 65,338 on the 16-inch with 32 gigabytes of memory. And the last thing I want to check for this video for performance is going to be Final Cut Pro. So I have this test Final Cut Pro video, which is actually of my iPhone 12 Pro unboxing last year. And it's about 10 minutes and 39 seconds. The 16-inch MacBook Pro actually finished exporting this way faster than any previous computer at a flat 4 minutes. So I'm curious if this extra 32 gigabytes of memory on the 14-inch will make any difference on that. So we're just going to export this as format computer, and this is going to be faster in code. Click next, we'll save it, and we'll time this out in 3, 2, 1, start. And we're off to the races, and we will stop this timer when the export finishes. Okay, so we're just about finished with this test on the 14-inch MacBook Pro. We are at 97%. It looks like we're going to beat the time of the 16-inch MacBook Pro with 32 gigabytes of memory by about 20 seconds or so. 19, 18, 100% it says, just waiting for it to close out. There we go. 3 minutes and 51 seconds. So we actually beat out the 16-inch MacBook Pro by about 8 seconds, with the 14-inch MacBook Pro running the M1 Max with 64 gigabytes of RAM versus the M1 Max with 32 gigabytes of RAM. So it looks like that 64 gigabytes of memory is making a little bit of a difference over the 32. As far as battery life goes, I haven't had these long enough to do any battery tests, but Apple claims up to 11 hours of wireless web surfing with the 14-inch and up to 14 hours of wireless web with the 16-inch. So TBD on battery life from me. Now there's just one last thing that I almost forgot about that I wanted to mention, and that's the trackpads. Obviously the 16-inch MacBook Pro has a larger trackpad, you can see that, but they also sound different. The 16-inch MacBook Pro sounds slightly like a dull thud, more like the MacBook Air trackpad, whereas the 14-inch MacBook Pro has kind of a clank or tink sound to it, kind of like the 13-inch MacBook Pro. Now it's just a small little difference, and I actually prefer the thud sound. It's more dull compared to the ting or clank or whatever it is on the 14-inch MacBook Pro. And if it's something you're doing thousands of times a day, that can get annoying to some people who are sensitive, like me apparently. But that's pretty much it for this comparison of the new 16-inch and 14-inch MacBook Pros running the M1 Max processors. The bottom line is, these things are fast, like way faster than the previous versions of themselves. And that's pretty sweet. And they still do it quietly. And if you look at my benchmark video for the 16-inch M1 Max, the fan was pretty much inaudible the entire time with anything I threw at it, which is kind of nuts if you think about it. But what do you guys think? Do you have any questions about these laptops, or is there something that you want me to test? Now, I can't test everything because I just don't have the skill set to test everything. But if there's something that I can do, I will definitely give it a shot. And if it makes sense for a video, I will make it. So hit subscribe if you want to see future videos on these laptops. Hit the thumbs up button if you liked this video, and I'll see you next time.